on this, the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. John, first off, on the likelihood of being able to delay all four trials, how likely is that? When I spoke to Bill Barr, he said maybe a couple, but certainly the January 6th one can and should be adjudicated before the election. What do you think?
I think General Barr is right. Given the number of cases that have been brought against President Trump, one of them is going to be able to start, you'd think, at least by next summer. Unfortunately, that would be right at smack dab in the middle of the end of the primaries and the beginning of the timing for the the nominating conventions. I actually, if I were to guess, I would think the one about the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago would be the one that could go first and might go fastest, because it's not the sprawling indictment, for example, like the one you saw in Georgia about January 6th that has 12, 13, 14 defendants and runs from election day all the way to a year after the election. I don't see how something that's wrong with that many people, that many charges, could possibly go to trial and really get started in a fair way before next summer. The classified information trial is very discreet. It's really an obstruction of justice charge. It really just depends on a few witnesses, a little bit of testimony on some documents. Maybe that's the one that can be accelerated to go first.
You know, John, Donald Trump and his lawyers do have a point, do they not, though, with this sudden rush to get to trial? I mean, in Atlanta, where this thing has been percolating for the better part of 2.5 years, and now all of a sudden it's a rush to get to trial. That does seem weird. What do you think?
We shouldn't forget how unprecedented this is. This is the first time a former president has ever been charged by anybody, by a state or federal prosecutor. We used to think that presidents should just be allowed to ride off in the sunset like the end of some Western movie. Even if they might have done bad things, we also thought it was best for the country to focus on the future and to stop relitigating and refighting the battles of the past. But as in many ways, Trump has broken rules here as well. Now, one thing about the filing that the Trump lawyers have made, I'm not sure about some of it. I can see we need more time to prepare. We need more time to get witnesses, more time to see documents. I think that's a legitimate reason to schedule a trial for later. But to say, I'm busy with other stuff, Trump's got to run for president, he's got other things to do, I don't find that a very compelling argument to a judge and a criminal justice system that wants to get on with business. It's the right of the defendant to have a speedy trial, but also the public wants to make sure defendants don't sit around waiting for months or even years for a fair trial.
So could I ask you a dumb question on that? How is that decided, John? In other words, does the judge weigh all of this? And, you know, depending on the judge, can he or she finally say, no, this is when we're doing it, end the story? How is that ultimately decided?
There are no dumb questions in the Cavuto School of Law classroom, believe me.
That's a very
important question. This is an important question. It's really up to the judge. The district judge, the trial judge, is the king or queen of her courtroom or his courtroom, and they decide things like scheduling. It's really up to them. You could always appeal, but if you appeal things like when are we going to have the trial and things like that, you're just going to make the trial judge, who's going to make all kinds of decisions of what witnesses and evidence you get to put into the record before the jury, really unhappy with you. And so usually the trial judge sets a date. Usually there's not a lot of fighting after he or she makes that final decision.
You know, John, one of the things that Bill Barr ended our interview with, I asked about the likelihood of, with some 91 criminal charges, the likelihood of the former president skating on all of them, whatever your views of him or the charges, that mathematically is a high bar, and that he might be and could be conceivably convicted on a variety of those charges. That begs the question then, how do you punish him? He said, Neil, you don't send him to jail. The idea of a former president in jail, it's unfathomable. You might put him under house arrest or detention. But that would be it, no matter the number of charges. I want to make sure here, I'm kind of paraphrasing the Attorney General, but what do you make of that? That no matter what, Donald Trump is not going to jail.
I'd like to amend General Barr's point in that what he's providing you is the perspective of the Attorney General of the United States, who's in charge of only 2 of the 4 cases so far. He's in charge of the classified information and the other special counsel trial involving January 6th. There, I think the Attorney General's perspective could be a good one. How much is the public interest served by seeing a former president of President Trump's age sitting in prison, maybe dying in prison? I know there are people who really hate President Trump would like to see that, but I agree. It's hard to see how the public interest is served. That's not the case with the Georgia case. Some of the charges that have been brought in the state of Georgia require a 5-year minimum sentence on conviction. There's not really leeway to say, we're just going to let you out with a fine. This is actually why I think having state DAs prosecute former presidents or candidates for office is troublesome, because the agenda of that state elected official from a red state or a blue state might interfere with what might be best in the national interest. They might just be representing, for example, what Fulton County would like to see happen to Donald Trump, even though that might hurt the way we should think about treating presidents in the past and in the future.
Got it. John Yoo, great catching up with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil.
John Yoo.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.